My name is Nicholas. I'm 42 years old, work in technology here in London, and I've always considered myself a man of principles, or at least I did. Today, after everything, I'm not so sure of what I am anymore. What I am now is a man who survives, who tries to understand how 8 years of marriage can crumble in just a few minutes, how the life you built brick by brick can collapse like a sandcastle in the wind. I live in this great city, surrounded by millions of people, and yet I have never felt more alone than I do right now. I met Marta in 2010, back when I still lived in Brazil, in Osasco. She was 28 years old, the kind of beautiful that isn't just physical. It was the way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she was genuinely happy. We met at a cafe downtown, one of those small places where locals gathered to escape the urban chaos. She spilled her coffee on my shirt, and instead of hysterical apologies, she simply laughed and said it was a sign from the universe. In that moment, I believed her. I believed in signs, in destiny, in the kind of love stories that people write songs about. We dated for 8 years before getting married. 8 years! All our friends said we were crazy for taking so long, that we should already be building an entire life together. But Marta was that way. She wanted to be sure. I did too. We wanted to know each other in all seasons, in all moments. Marriage is forever, we thought. There would be no rush. We had time. We had so much time ahead of us, or so we believed. When we finally married, in a quiet ceremony in Osasco, I felt that I had conquered the greatest treasure in the world. My parents were there, her family as well. I promised that I would love her for all the days of our lives. She promised the same, with tears in her eyes. I believed her. God, how I believed her. I would have believed anything she told me in that moment. I was so completely, utterly convinced that our love would last through anything, that we were different from other couples, that what we had was special, untouchable, permanent. The first 3 years were what you'd expect from a marriage. It wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. We had arguments about money, about how to organize the house, about how to divide responsibilities and household chores. But there was communication, there was respect, there was love, or at least I thought there was. Maybe it was just a well-constructed illusion, something built on a foundation of false assumptions that I was too blind, too in love, too naive to see through. 2 years after we married, I received a job offer from a prestigious technology company here in London. It was an incredible opportunity, the kind that comes once in a lifetime. The salary was significantly higher, the position was more prestigious, and it represented everything I had been working towards during my career. When I told Marta about it, I expected resistance. After all, it meant leaving Brazil, leaving our families, starting over in a completely new country. Instead, she surprised me. She said it was time for an adventure, that she wanted to support my dreams, that we could build something even more beautiful together in Europe. So we packed our lives into suitcases and moved to London. It was exciting and terrifying all at once. Marta found work as an accountant for a British firm, and we settled into a flat in a nice area of the city. We made new friends, explored the city together on weekends, took trips to other European countries during our holidays. To anyone looking at us from the outside, we were the perfect couple, a Brazilian pair who had made it in London, living the dream, traveling, building success together. Then things began to change in subtle ways, like shadows gradually lengthening as the sun sets. Marta began going out more frequently, often for dinner with girlfriends or colleagues from work. Nothing alarming, I thought. Everyone needs time away from routine. She bought a new phone, a more expensive model, for work, she explained. That's fine, I thought. She deserved the best things. I wanted her to have everything. Looking back now, I realize I was so eager to trust her, so committed to believing in our relationship, that I missed every single red flag. Or perhaps I saw them but chose to look away, believing that love should mean automatically trusting your partner's every word. Around the 5th year of our marriage, I began to notice that I no longer knew my own wife. There were secrets, not explicitly stated, but floating between us like invisible ghosts that haunted our home. Sometimes she came home late from the office, with explanations that weren't really explanations at all, just vague references to work obligations and the London Underground delays that seemed to happen more frequently than they used to. Other times she simply wouldn't show up for dinner, sending a quick message saying she had gotten stuck at work or had decided to go out with colleagues for drinks. I began to question everything, including my own sanity. Was this paranoia on my part? Was it simple insecurity, the kind that creeps into a relationship when you're not paying attention? I tried not to make accusations, merely mentioning my concerns during our quiet evenings at home. "You've been distant lately," I said one night, trying to keep my voice casual, trying not to sound accusatory as we sat in our London flat overlooking the city lights. She responded, "You're being dramatic. You work too much and expect me to sit at home waiting for you." And I believed her. What man wants to think he's being dramatic, that he's imagining things, that he's somehow insufficient to keep his wife close and engaged? The worst part, and this is where my heart truly breaks, is that there were warnings. My best friend Ricardo, who had also moved to London to work in finance, sat down with me one afternoon at our favourite pub and told me that he had seen Marta at a restaurant in Mayfair with a man who was definitely not her work colleague. It wasn't a professional meeting. They were sharing the same drink, the same glass, and there was something intimate in the way they were conversing, something that went far beyond professional courtesy or workplace friendship. Ricardo's voice was grave, concerned, as he told me this. He wasn't gossiping. He was trying to protect me. I called Ricardo crazy. I told him he was seeing things, misinterpreting what he saw. I said that Marta would never do that our relationship was too strong, too solid to be threatened by some misunderstanding, that our foundation was built on 8 years of dating, of getting to know each other completely before making the ultimate commitment, and 3 years of marriage in a foreign country where we only had each other. I refused to even consider the possibility that he might be right. I rejected his concern, his friendship, his attempt to warn me about what was happening right under my nose, happening in this city where I had thought we were building something beautiful together. Ricardo just shook his head and left. Weeks later, he refused to meet my eyes during our encounters. I think he knew that I would abandon our friendship to maintain my faith in my marriage. And you know what? I blamed him for that too. I blamed him for bringing truths I didn't want to hear, for disrupting my carefully constructed reality, for forcing me to question something I was determined not to question. We stopped hanging out as much after that. Our friendship became strained, distant, another casualty of my desperate need to believe in Marta's faithfulness. I discovered the truth on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday in London. I was home with the flu, working remotely from our flat, when her phone rang in the kitchen. She was in the shower. The phone kept ringing, persistent and demanding. Without thinking too much about it, or perhaps thinking far too much about it, I picked up the phone. It was her colleague, that guy named Felipe, who worked at her accounting firm. The voicemail he left was brief, but absolutely devastating in its implications. "Marta, what a night last night, huh? I can't wait to see you again. You're incredible. London is amazing with you in it." My world froze, literally froze in that moment. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The phone felt like it was burning in my grip. I spent the next hour clicking through her messages, her conversations, her entire digital life that I had never seen before. Years of lies, of secret meetings, of gestures that I had interpreted as professional, but that now glowed in a completely different, sinister colour. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of lies built on top of more lies, constructed with meticulous care to keep me in the dark, to keep me believing in a fantasy while she lived a completely different reality in this city we shared. When Marta emerged from the shower and saw me sitting there with her phone in my hands, with tears streaming down my face, her expression shifted in an instant. First came confusion, then realization, and finally panic. Not the panic of guilt, at least not immediately, but the panic of being caught, of having her carefully constructed lies exposed to the harsh light of truth. She wrapped herself in a towel and stood frozen in the doorway, water still dripping from her hair, looking like a stranger wearing my wife's face. I held up the phone. I didn't need to say anything. The message from Felipe was still there on the screen, glowing like an accusation. She stared at it, and I watched as her entire body seemed to deflate. Her shoulders sagged. Her face went pale. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the truth written across her features. Not remorse, but fear. Fear of losing me, yes, but also fear of the life she had built coming to an end, of having to face the consequences of her actions. "Nicholas, I can explain," she said, and those words, those goddamn words, have echoed in my mind 1,000 times since that day, as if there was an explanation that could make this better, as if there was a narrative that could transform infidelity into something acceptable, understandable, forgivable. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that phone across the room and watch it shatter against the wall, just as my life was shattering around me. Instead, I stood up quietly and walked past her. I went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed we shared, the bed where we had made love just days before, where I had held her in my arms and felt secure in our connection. I felt sick, physically ill. My stomach was turning, my heart was racing, and I couldn't catch my breath. This was what betrayal felt like. Not dramatic or sudden, but suffocating, like someone was sitting on my chest, pressing down, making it impossible to breathe. Marta followed me. She sat beside me, still wrapped in that towel, and began to talk. The words poured out of her in a desperate rush, as if by speaking quickly enough, by flooding me with explanations, she could somehow undo what she had done. She told me about how the marriage had become monotonous. She told me about how I had become distant, focused on my work, on my career advancement, on building our financial security. She said that I hadn't made her feel beautiful or desired in years. She spoke about Felipe as if he was some kind of accident, some external force that she couldn't control, like a storm that had swept through her life without her permission. "I never intended for this to happen," she said, and those words made me angrier than anything else she could have said, as if infidelity was something that just happened, like catching a cold or getting caught in the rain. As if it didn't require 1,000 conscious choices, 1,000 moments, where she could have said no, where she could have come to me instead, where she could have fought for our marriage instead of dismantling it piece by piece. I asked her how long it had been going on. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't days. It wasn't weeks. When she finally admitted that it had been almost 2 years, I felt something break inside me. 2 years. 2 years of lies. 2 years of coming home to me and pretending nothing was wrong. 2 years of accepting my love while giving her heart to someone else. 2 years of being played for a fool while I worked hard to provide for us, to build a life for us, to make her happy. 2 years? I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant, as if it was coming from someone else's mouth. 2 years, Marta. 2 years of lying to my face every single day. I thought about all the times she had told me she was working late, all the times she had gone out with friends, all the times she had held my hand and looked into my eyes and said she loved me. Every single one of those moments was now tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of her betrayal. She began to cry then. Real tears, or what looked like real tears. She begged for my forgiveness. She promised that it was over, that she had ended things with Felipe just last week, after being with him for 2 years, because she realized how much she loved me, how much our marriage meant to her, how foolish she had been. She talked about how she wanted to work on us, how she wanted to go to therapy, how she wanted to rebuild the trust that she had destroyed. But all I could think about was how calculated it all was. She didn't end things with Felipe because she loved me. She ended things with Felipe because she got caught. If I hadn't been home sick that day, if I hadn't answered her phone, she would still be with him. She would still be lying to me. She would still be living this double life. And I would still be in the dark, blissfully unaware of the humiliation I was suffering. I stood up and walked away from her. I went into the living room of our London flat and sat on the sofa, staring out the window at the city lights. Down there, millions of people were going about their lives. How many of them were living lies like this? How many of them were being betrayed by the people they loved? How many of them were sitting alone in the darkness, trying to make sense of a world that no longer made sense? Over the following days, I moved through the flat like a ghost. Marta tried to talk to me constantly, but I couldn't bear to listen to her voice. Every word that came out of her mouth felt like another knife wound. I took time off from work, calling my manager and telling him I was dealing with a family emergency. I couldn't focus on my job. I couldn't focus on anything. All I could do was sit and think about how naive I had been, how blind I had been, how desperately I had wanted to believe in something that was never real. I thought about calling my parents back in Brazil, but what would I tell them? That their son's marriage was a lie? That the woman I had chosen, the woman they had welcomed into our family, had been unfaithful for 2 years? I couldn't bear the shame of it. I couldn't bear hearing the disappointment in their voices. So instead, I suffered in silence, alone in this city where I had thought I was building something beautiful. Ricardo reached out to me. He had heard through the grapevine that something was wrong. I had suddenly disappeared from our usual social circle, and people were starting to ask questions. When I finally agreed to meet him for a drink, I broke down. I told him everything. I told him about Felipe, about the 2 years of lies, about how right he had been when he tried to warn me. He listened without judgment, and I was grateful for that. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply sat there and let me fall apart. "What are you going to do?" he asked me eventually, after I had finished my terrible confession. I didn't know. That was the honest truth. I didn't know what I was going to do. Did I want to stay in the marriage and try to rebuild something from the ashes? Did I want to leave and start over again, alone in this city where everything reminded me of her? Did I want to try to destroy her the way she had destroyed me? I was paralyzed by indecision, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Marta continued to reach out, continued to apologize, continued to beg for another chance. She even suggested that we see a marriage counselor. Part of me wanted to say no, to refuse her offer of reconciliation on principle. But another part of me, a part that I'm not entirely proud of, wanted to try. Not because I believed we could fix things, but because I wasn't ready to accept that 8 years of my life had meant nothing. I wasn't ready to accept that our marriage was truly over. So we made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Sarah Chen came highly recommended. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately made me feel slightly less like I was drowning. Our first session was excruciating. Marta and I sat on opposite ends of a sofa, unable to look at each other, while Dr. Chen asked us questions about our relationship, about how we had arrived at this point of crisis. I found myself pouring out all my pain, all my confusion, all my anger during that first session. I talked about how betrayed I felt, how humiliated I felt, how I no longer knew who I was or what I wanted from life. Marta listened, and occasionally she would add her own perspective, trying to explain her actions through the lens of her own insecurities and unhappiness. But for me, no explanation was enough. No explanation could undo what she had done. The therapy sessions became a routine, a twice-weekly appointment that I both dreaded and needed. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Marta and I would sit in Dr. Chen's office in central London, surrounded by soft lighting and comfortable furniture, and attempt to excavate the ruins of our marriage. It was like archaeological work, digging through layers of time and experience, trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. But unlike archaeology, where you're discovering ancient civilizations, we were uncovering the truth about our relationship, or rather, the lack thereof. Dr. Chen asked difficult questions. She wanted to know about our intimacy, about our communication patterns, about the moments when we had felt most connected and most distant. She asked Marta about her childhood, about her family dynamics, about whether she had witnessed infidelity in her own parents' relationship. She asked me about my expectations for marriage, about whether I had been putting too much pressure on Marta to be perfect, to be everything I needed. She asked us both about our dreams and fears, and the ways we had stopped sharing those things with each other. I was resistant to some of her suggestions. I didn't want to hear that I had any responsibility for what Marta had done. I didn't want to believe that my focus on work, my long hours at the office, my stress about building my career in a foreign country, had somehow contributed to her decision to seek comfort in another man's arms. It felt like victim blaming to me. It felt like she was saying that if I had just been a better husband, Marta wouldn't have cheated. But as the sessions continued, I began to see the more complicated truth beneath that defensive response. The truth was that our marriage had been deteriorating slowly for years. We had stopped having meaningful conversations. We had stopped making time for each other. We had stopped being vulnerable with each other about our fears and insecurities. We had turned into roommates who slept in the same bed, who occasionally had sex, who paid bills together. But we had lost the intimacy that comes from truly knowing someone, from being fully present with them. Marta, in her sessions with Dr. Chen, admitted that she had felt invisible. She had moved to a foreign country for my career, had given up her life in Brazil, had started over in London where she didn't know anyone initially. She had felt lonely even when I was there. She had felt like a supporting character in my life rather than a co-star in our shared story. When Felipe came along, charming, attentive Felipe who listened to her and made her feel special, she had been vulnerable to his advances in a way that she would not have been if our marriage had been strong and secure. But this revelation, while intellectually understandable, didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the betrayal. It didn't make me suddenly forgive her and move forward as if nothing had happened. If anything, it made things more complicated. Because now I could see how our marriage had become a prison for both of us, just in different ways. I had been trapped in my work, in my ambition, in my need to prove that I had made the right decision by moving to London. She had been trapped in isolation and loneliness, even though she was living with the person she had supposedly chosen to spend her life with. One evening, after a particularly intense therapy session, I found myself walking through London alone. I wandered through the streets for hours, not really paying attention to where I was going. I found myself in Hyde Park, sitting on a bench as the sun began to set, casting everything in shades of orange and gold. A couple walked past me, holding hands, laughing about something. I felt a flash of anger and envy. How could they be so happy when the world was so full of pain and betrayal? I called my mother that night. It was late in Brazil, but I knew she would be awake. I told her everything. I told her about Marta's infidelity, about the 2 years of lies, about the therapy sessions, and the slow realization that our marriage had been broken long before Felipe came into the picture. My mother listened without interrupting, and when I had finished, she said something that I will never forget. "Nicholas, my son, pain is the price we pay for love. Every person who has ever loved deeply has also suffered deeply. The question is not whether we will experience betrayal or loss. The question is what we do with that experience. Do we let it destroy us, or do we let it transform us?" I didn't have an answer for her that night, but her words stayed with me. They echoed in my mind during the following weeks as I continued to process what had happened, as I continued to sit across from Marta in Dr. Chen's office and try to figure out if our marriage could be salvaged or if we should simply let it die. Months passed. The seasons changed in London. Winter gave way to spring, and the city began to bloom with new life. Flowers appeared in parks and gardens. Trees that had been bare suddenly sprouted leaves, and the days grew longer. I watched this transformation and wondered if it was possible for me to transform as well, to grow beyond this pain and begin to heal. In therapy, we began to talk about the possibility of moving forward, Not moving on, that felt like abandonment, but moving forward together, if that was what we both wanted. Dr. Chen asked us if we could envision a future together, if we could imagine rebuilding trust over time. The answer for both of us was uncertain, which seemed appropriate given everything that had happened. Marta made efforts. She cut off all contact with Felipe, or at least she said she did. She showed me her phone regularly, letting me see her messages, giving me access to her social media accounts. She suggested that we spend more quality time together, that we plan date nights, that we remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. She was like a woman on a mission to prove her commitment to our marriage, to demonstrate through action that she was serious about reconciliation. I, on the other hand, found myself struggling with trust. Every time she said she was working late, I would feel my chest tighten with suspicion. Every time she came home with a new text message, I would wonder who she was talking to. Every time she looked at her phone, I would ask myself what she was hiding. The betrayal had infected me with a kind of paranoia that I couldn't quite shake, no matter how many times Dr. Chen assured me that this was normal, that this was part of the healing process. One day, about 4 months after I had discovered the affair, Marta and I went to a restaurant we had loved when we first moved to London. It was a small Italian place in Shoreditch, intimate and quiet. We had celebrated many occasions there, job promotions, birthdays, anniversaries. As we sat across from each other at our usual table, I looked at Marta and tried to see the woman I had married. She was still beautiful. She still had that same smile that had captivated me all those years ago in that cafe in Osasco. But there was something different now, something that had changed fundamentally and irreversibly. "Do you still love me?" I asked her suddenly, not sure if I really wanted to know the answer. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Yes," she said. "I do. I know I have no right to ask you to believe me, but I do. I love you, Nicholas. I've never stopped loving you, even when I was with Felipe. I know that doesn't make sense, but it's the truth." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that love, at least the kind of love that lasts, requires more than just words. It requires consistency. It requires trust. It requires the daily choice to show up and be present and vulnerable. And I wasn't sure if we could rebuild that, if the foundation we had built was strong enough to support a new structure. We continued to go to therapy. We continued to try. There were good days where it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. And there were bad days where I would catch myself staring at Marta and thinking about her with Felipe, imagining things that made my stomach turn with jealousy and pain. About 6 months into our reconciliation attempt, I realized that I needed to make a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo forever, existing in a state of uncertainty and doubt. Either I was going to commit to rebuilding our marriage, or I was going to leave and start over. There was no middle ground, no comfortable compromise that would allow me to have the security of marriage without the vulnerability that marriage requires. I made the decision on a rainy Saturday morning in London. The kind of morning where the sky is grey and heavy, where the rain comes down in sheets, where everything feels cold and damp and relentless. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I stared out at the rain, and I realized that I was tired. Tired of questioning every word Marta spoke, tired of analyzing every gesture for hidden meaning, tired of carrying this weight of betrayal around with me like a stone in my chest, tired of living in a marriage that felt like a performance, where we were both playing roles rather than being authentic with each other. I told Marta that I wanted to stay, that I wanted to try to rebuild our marriage, that I was willing to forgive her, not because I had forgotten what she had done. I would never forget that, but because I had come to understand that forgiveness was not about absolution. It was about releasing the anger that was poisoning me, that was eating me alive from the inside out. Forgiveness was for me, not for her. She cried when I told her. Not tears of joy, but tears of relief mixed with a kind of desperate gratitude. She held me and whispered apologies over and over again, and I let her. even though I knew that apologies couldn't undo what had been done. I knew that we were beginning something new, something different from what we had before. We weren't rebuilding the old marriage. That marriage, the one built on illusions and false security, was dead. What we were attempting to build was something else entirely, something more honest, more fragile, more real. The months that followed were strange. It was as if someone had turned up the saturation on my life. Everything felt more intense, more immediate. Moments of happiness felt more joyful because they were set against the backdrop of my recent pain. Moments of doubt felt more crushing because I was constantly reminded of how fragile trust really was. We continued to see Dr. Chen, and slowly, incrementally, I began to feel less like I was drowning. Marta took on more of the emotional work in our relationship. She went to individual therapy to address the issues that had led her to seek comfort outside of our marriage. She read books about infidelity and betrayal. She attended a support group for people who had hurt their partners through cheating. She wasn't just saying that she was sorry. She was doing the work to understand why she had made the choices she had made to address the underlying insecurities and unhappiness that had made her vulnerable to Felipe's advances. I, too, began to look at my own role in our marriage's deterioration. I recognized that I had been so focused on building my career, on establishing myself in London, on achieving financial security, that I had neglected the most important thing, my relationship with my wife. I had treated marriage like another project to manage, another goal to accomplish, rather than as an ongoing practice of love and presence and vulnerability. I started to make changes. I set boundaries at work. I refused to check emails after 7 in the evening. I scheduled date nights with Marta and treated them with the same level of importance that I treated client meetings. I made an effort to listen to her, really listen, without planning my response while she was talking. I asked her about her dreams and fears, and I shared mine with her. We began to have conversations again, real conversations that went deeper than surface-level pleasantries. One evening, about a year after I had discovered the affair, Marta and I sat on our sofa in our London flat and talked about whether we wanted to try to have children. It was a significant moment because having children would mean committing to a shared future, would mean believing that our marriage could not only survive but thrive. Before, I wouldn't have been able to even contemplate such a thing. The wound was still too fresh. But time and work and Dr. Chen's patient guidance had helped me move toward a place where I could imagine building something new with Marta, something that wasn't just a resurrection of what we had lost, but a creation of something better. "Do you think you could trust me again?" Marta asked me that night. "I mean, really trust me, not just go through the motions." I thought about it carefully before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know that I want to try, and I know that you're trying. That has to be enough for now." She nodded, and we sat together in the darkness of our flat, listening to the sounds of London outside our window, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, the rain that had started to fall again. It wasn't a happy ending, the kind you read about in romantic novels, but it was real, it was honest, it was a beginning. The second year after the discovery was marked by what I can only describe as a cautious hope. There were still difficult moments. There were still times when I would see a message on Marta's phone or hear a story about a colleague named Felipe, and I would feel that familiar tightness in my chest. But increasingly, those moments became less frequent. I was learning to live with the scar of betrayal without letting it define me or our relationship. We began to travel again, something we had stopped doing because the very act of travel felt fraught with potential for betrayal. We went to Paris for a weekend and walked along the Seine, holding hands like teenagers. We visited Portugal and explored the colourful tiles and narrow streets of Lisbon. We went back to Brazil for Christmas and introduced our parents to a different version of ourselves, one that had been tested by fire and had chosen to stay together anyway. My friendship with Ricardo was also healing. I had apologized for blaming him, for choosing to believe Marta over his warning. He had accepted my apology graciously, understanding that I had been acting out of a desperate need to maintain my illusions. We began to hang out again regularly, and I was grateful for his presence in my life, for his willingness to stand by me even when I had pushed him away. At work, I found myself becoming more balanced. I was promoted to a senior position at my firm, but I didn't let the promotion consume my life the way I had before. I had learned through painful experience that no job, no amount of money, no career achievement could fill the void created by a failing marriage. I had learned that success in the professional world meant nothing if you were failing in your personal relationships. Marta, too, seemed to have found a new sense of peace. She loved her job and she was good at it, but she no longer used work as an escape from difficult feelings. She had built friendships with other women in London, women who had become genuine friends rather than just colleagues. She was happier, and her happiness was infectious. It reminded me of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. That ability she had to find joy even in difficult circumstances. That resilience that had allowed her to start over when we moved to London. That capacity for growth and change. About 18 months after the discovery, Marta and I were lying in bed one night, and she asked me if I had truly forgiven her. It was a question I had asked myself many times, and my answer had changed depending on the day, depending on my mood, depending on what had triggered my memories of the affair. "I think I have," I said slowly. "Not in the sense that what you did is okay, because it's not. Not in the sense that I've forgotten about it, because I haven't. But in the sense that I've stopped hating you for it. In the sense that I can see you as a person who made a mistake, rather than as a person who is fundamentally dishonest or untrustworthy." "That's more than I deserve," she said quietly. "Maybe," I agreed, "but it's what I can give you right now, and it's what you're going to have to work with." We made love that night, and it was different from before the affair. It was deeper, more intimate, charged with an awareness of how fragile everything we had was, how much we had lost, and how much we had managed to rebuild. I held her afterward, and I felt something that I had not felt since before the discovery. A sense of coming home, of being exactly where I needed to be. But even as I held her, even as I felt this sense of restoration, I knew that we would never be the same. The naive version of me, the version that believed betrayal couldn't happen to people who loved each other, was gone forever. I was older now, not just in years, but in experience. I had seen the worst of my wife, and she had seen the worst of me. My anger, my pain, my desperate need to control and protect myself from further hurt. 2 years after the discovery of the affair, Marta and I made a conscious decision to stop talking about Felipe. Not to forget about him, that would have been impossible, but to stop letting him occupy space in our conversations, in our minds, in the fabric of our relationship. It was a turning point of sorts, a declaration that we were moving forward, that we were no longer defined by this moment of crisis. We had processed it, we had worked through it, and now it was time to build something new. The irony, of course, is that by stopping talking about the affair, it became impossible to fully escape it. It lingered in the background like a ghost, present even in its absence. There were still moments when I would catch myself wondering about specific details. What had they done together? What had Felipe said to make her laugh? Whether she had felt more attracted to him than to me? These thoughts would ambush me at unexpected moments, during a mundane task like washing dishes or sitting in traffic on the tube, and I would have to actively work to push them away. Dr. Chen had warned us that this would happen. She had explained that healing from betrayal is not linear, that we don't move from pain to acceptance in a straight path. Instead, we move in circles and spirals, sometimes revisiting the same painful emotions we thought we had processed, only to discover new layers of pain underneath. She had equipped us with tools to manage these moments. Breathing exercises, grounding techniques, ways to reconnect with each other when the memories became overwhelming. What surprised me most was how much our intimate life improved. I had assumed that after the betrayal, I would struggle with physical intimacy, that I would be plagued by images of Marta with Felipe, whenever we tried to be close, but the opposite happened. As I learned to trust her again, as I began to believe that she was genuinely committed to our marriage, our sexual connection deepened. It became less about performance and more about genuine connection, less about routine and more about presence. Marta seemed to experience something similar. She became more comfortable asking for what she wanted, more willing to be vulnerable in ways that she hadn't been before. She told me that in the past, she had felt inhibited, like she had to perform a version of sexuality that matched some ideal, rather than expressing her genuine desires. Now, with the weight of the affair and its aftermath forcing us both to be honest about our needs, we had developed a more authentic, intimate connection. We began to make plans for the future in a way that felt real and grounded, rather than abstract and theoretical. We talked about buying a house instead of renting the flat. We discussed the possibility of starting a family. We made lists of the places we wanted to travel to, the experiences we wanted to have together. These conversations felt significant because they represented a commitment to a shared future, a belief that our relationship could not only survive, but flourish. But there were also moments of doubt that crept in, usually when I was alone with my thoughts. I would find myself in a quiet moment at work, sitting at my desk, and suddenly I would be overwhelmed by a wave of insecurity. What if Marta was hiding something else from me? What if she had contacts with Felipe that I didn't know about? What if she was using her work as a cover for something sinister? These thoughts were exhausting and I knew largely irrational, but they persisted nonetheless, a remnant of the damage that had been done to my ability to trust. I started seeing my own therapist during this period, a man named Dr. Michael Davies, who specialized in trauma and trust issues. Unlike Dr. Chen, who had worked with both of us as a couple, Dr. Davies worked with me alone, helping me process my own feelings about the betrayal, helping me understand where my insecurity came from, helping me distinguish between intuition and paranoia. The question, Dr. Davies asked me one afternoon, is whether you want to stay in this marriage for the right reasons or for the wrong reasons. Are you staying because you genuinely believe that you and Marta can build something beautiful together? Or are you staying because leaving would feel like failure? Are you staying because you love her? Or are you staying because you're afraid? I didn't have an immediate answer. It took me several sessions to really grapple with that question, to excavate my true motivations. And what I discovered was that my reasons were mixed. Part of me wanted to stay because I did love Marta, because I believed we could build something better. Part of me wanted to stay because leaving would feel like admitting defeat, like proving everyone who had doubted our marriage right. Part of me wanted to stay because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid of the unknown. But as I worked through these conflicting motivations with Dr. Davies, I came to a realization. The mix of reasons was okay. Love in real relationships is never pure. It's always tangled up with other emotions, other needs, other fears. What mattered was that the balance was right, that the reasons I was staying were more about growth and genuine connection than about fear and avoidance. During this time, I also reconnected with my parents in Brazil. I had been avoiding detailed conversations with them about the affair, not wanting to expose Marta to their judgment. But my mother gently insisted that I tell her more. When I finally did, laying out the full story during a long phone call, she listened with the patience of someone who had seen much and was surprised by little. "Your father and I," she said to me at the end of my recounting, "have been married for 45 years. Do you know how many times we have come close to ending it? Do you know how many times we have hurt each other, deliberately or otherwise? The difference between a marriage that lasts and one that doesn't is not whether there is pain. Every marriage has pain. The difference is whether both people are willing to keep choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard." Her words echoed my therapist's questions. Was I choosing Marta every day? Was I choosing to believe in our marriage? Was I choosing, despite the evidence of her betrayal, to trust that she was committed to rebuilding what we had lost? The answer, increasingly, was yes. Not because I was naive or foolish, but because I had come to understand that relationships require an act of faith, not religious faith necessarily, but a willingness to be vulnerable, a willingness to believe in the possibility of growth and change, a willingness to stay even when staying is difficult. 3 years after the affair, Marta and I took a trip to Paris. We went in the spring, when the city was in full bloom, when the parks were filled with flowers and lovers. We stayed in a small hotel in the Marais, and we spent our days walking through museums and along the Seine, eating too much good food and drinking good wine. On our last night, we sat at a café overlooking the city, and Marta took my hand. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving. I know I didn't deserve another chance, and I know the trust is still fragile. But thank you for staying, for working with me to try to rebuild what I broke." I squeezed her hand. "I didn't stay for you," I said. "I stayed for us. I stayed because I realized that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain and the broken trust, I still want to build a life with you. I still want that shared future we talked about. Do you still love me?" she asked. And it was the same question she had asked me years before in that Italian restaurant in Shoreditch. "Yes," I said. "I do. It's a different kind of love than what I felt before. It's more complicated, more hard-won, more real. But yes, I love you." We sat there as the sun set over Paris, casting everything in shades of amber and rose. The city around us hummed with life and energy and possibility. And for the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something like peace. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but a quiet acceptance of what had happened, of the pain we had endured, and of the commitment we had made to each other to try again. 4 years have passed since I discovered the truth about Marta's infidelity. 4 years since that Tuesday when my entire world collapsed, and I had to rebuild myself from the ruins. As I sit here in our London flat, looking back at the journey we have taken together, I find myself in a place I never thought I would reach. A place of genuine peace, not the fragile peace of denial, but the solid peace that comes from having faced the worst and chosen to move forward anyway. Our marriage is different now, not better necessarily, not worse either, but fundamentally different. We know each other in ways we didn't before, ways that come from having survived a near-death experience together. We have seen each other at our absolute worst, me in my anger and despair, Marta in her deception and selfishness, and we have chosen to stay anyway. That creates a bond that is stronger than anything built on illusions of perfection. Last month, Marta gave birth to our daughter, Emma. She is beautiful and small and perfect in all the ways that newborns are. When I held her for the first time, I wept, not just because she was my daughter, but because her existence represented something profound, a future we had built together, despite the wreckage of betrayal, a commitment to creating something new and good and full of possibility. The pregnancy had been something we discussed extensively in therapy. Both Dr. Chen and Dr. Davies had encouraged us to really think about whether we were ready for children, whether our marriage was stable enough to welcome a new life into it. We had done the work, had put in the effort, and we had decided that we were ready. Not completely ready, no one ever is, but ready enough, committed enough, hopeful enough. Marta is an incredible mother. Watching her with Emma has given me new insight into the woman I married. She is patient and loving, and fully present in a way that reminds me of why I fell in love with her in the first place. And yes, there are moments when I think about the affair, when I wonder if she was this attentive, this loving, with Felipe. But those moments pass more quickly now, and I don't let them poison the present moment. I have also come to terms with the fact that I will never know certain things. I will never know exactly how many times she saw Felipe, exactly what they did together, exactly what she felt for him. Dr. Davies helped me understand that my need to know every detail was a way of trying to control the narrative, to make the betrayal comprehensible and therefore less terrifying. But some things, he explained, we have to accept we will never fully understand. And that's okay. That's part of learning to live with trauma. My career continues to progress. I was recently offered a partnership at my firm, a position that would have seemed like the ultimate achievement in my pre-betrayal life. I accepted it, but with very different priorities than I would have had before. I made clear that I would not be working the kinds of hours that had alienated me from Marta in the first place. I established boundaries. I made it known that my family came first and my career came second. To my surprise, they respected that. They valued my work enough to accommodate my need for balance. Ricardo and I have rekindled our friendship fully. We go out for drinks regularly, and he has become like an uncle to Emma. He married a woman named Sarah 2 years ago, and they are expecting their own child soon. We often talk about how life has a way of surprising us, of taking us in directions we never anticipated. He says that watching me and Marta work through the affair has made him appreciate his relationship with Sarah in ways he never would have otherwise. My parents came to London when Emma was born, and they stayed for 2 weeks. Watching my mother hold her granddaughter, watching the pride on my father's face, reminded me of why family matters so much. My mother pulled me aside one day and told me that she was proud of me, not just for staying in the marriage, but for being willing to do the work to make it better. She told me that strength is not about never being hurt. Strength is about continuing to show up and try even after you have been hurt. Marta's family has also been supportive, though there was some awkwardness at first. Her parents were devastated when they learned about the affair. They felt betrayed on my behalf, felt disappointed in their daughter. But they have also come to see that Marta was trying to work through her own issues, that she was not a bad person, but a person who had made a bad choice. They have made an effort to rebuild their relationship with her, and I appreciate that. Family is complicated, but it matters. The most surprising development has been my relationship with forgiveness itself. I had always thought of forgiveness as a single moment, a decision that you make and then you're done. But I have learned that forgiveness is a practice, something you have to do over and over again. Some days I forgive Marta easily, and some days I have to work at it, consciously choosing to release the anger and resentment that threatens to resurface. But each time I practice forgiveness, it gets easier. Each time I choose compassion over condemnation, I feel myself becoming a better person. Marta has also had to learn to forgive herself. She carries tremendous guilt about what she did, about the pain she caused me, about the way she violated the trust we had built together. In therapy, she has worked extensively on self-forgiveness, on understanding that she was a person struggling with her own issues and making poor choices, but that those poor choices did not define her entire character or determine her worth as a person. She has become an advocate for other women who have made similar mistakes, volunteering with an organization that helps women process infidelity from the perspective of the unfaithful partner. When I think about what I have learned from this experience, the list is long. I have learned that marriage requires constant attention and effort, that you cannot take your partner for granted or assume that love is enough to sustain a relationship without active engagement. I have learned that vulnerability is not weakness, that sharing your fears and insecurities with your partner actually strengthens the relationship rather than weakening it. I have learned that betrayal, while devastating, is not necessarily a death sentence for a marriage. I have learned that people are capable of growth and change, that past mistakes do not have to define future possibilities. I have also learned about myself. I have learned that I am stronger than I thought I was, that I have the capacity to experience profound pain and still choose to move forward. I have learned that I was using my career as a substitute for genuine intimacy and connection, and that this was a choice I was making, not something that was being done to me. I have learned that I need to be more attentive to my relationships, more present with the people I love, more willing to have difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. Last week, I was at a client meeting when someone mentioned that they had heard about our company hiring a new accountant named Felipe. My heart stopped for a moment, and I found myself asking if it was the same Felipe. It wasn't. This Felipe was a woman, which the client found amusing when I asked for clarification. But that moment of panic, that immediate spike of fear and jealousy, reminded me that healing is not linear. It reminded me that there are still triggers, still moments when the old wounds can be reopened, but I handled it differently than I would have in the past. I didn't contact Marta in a panic. I didn't accuse her of anything. Instead, I took a breath, recognized what was happening, and allowed the fear to pass without feeding it. That is the real victory of this journey. Not that the fears have disappeared entirely, but that I have learned to sit with them, to acknowledge them, without letting them control me. Marta knows that I still struggle sometimes. She sees it in my face when we are out, and she receives a text message from a male colleague. She understands that trust, once broken, takes a long time to fully restore. But she also sees that I am trying, that I am committing each day to the work of rebuilding. And that commitment means everything to her. If I could go back in time, back to that moment when I discovered the affair, would I do things differently? Would I leave immediately, preserve my pride, protect myself from further pain? I don't know. I would like to think that I would be wiser, more discerning, more careful about choosing a partner. But I also know that my younger self was not capable of the wisdom I have now. I had to live through the pain to gain this understanding. What I do know is this: the man I am now is not the man I was before the betrayal. I am sadder in some ways, more aware of the fragility of human connection and the capacity that we all have to hurt each other. But I am also happier in other ways, more present, more grateful for the people in my life, more aware of what truly matters. I have a daughter now, and every day I hold her and I think about the kind of person I want to model for her, the kind of relationships I want her to seek out, the kind of resilience I want her to develop. Marta is sleeping upstairs right now, Emma nestled against her chest. I can hear them sometimes, the baby making those small sounds that newborns make, Marta whispering softly to her. These are the moments that make all of the pain worthwhile. These are the moments that remind me why I chose to stay, why I chose to work through the betrayal instead of letting it destroy me. My name is Niklas, and I was betrayed by my wife after 8 years of marriage. But I am also a man who chose to forgive, who chose to rebuild, who chose to believe in the possibility of redemption and restoration. The betrayal did not destroy me. It transformed me. And while transformation is not always comfortable or easy, it has made me into someone I respect, someone who understands that love is not a feeling, but a practice, not a destination, but a journey that we take with someone by our side. As I look toward the future, I do so with cautious optimism. I know that we will face challenges. I know that there will be moments when the trust is tested again, when the wounds threaten to reopen. But I also know that we have the tools to navigate those challenges, that we have built a foundation strong enough to support whatever comes next. We are imperfect people in an imperfect marriage, but we are committed to showing up for each other day after day, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.